The carnival lights flickered across the evening sky as Yates Vaughn balanced his 7-year-old daughter Sophie on his shoulders, both of them watching the Ferris wheel with wide eyes. It wasn't the impressive spectacle that drew their attention, but rather the alarming metallic grinding noise emanating from the massive ride as it jolted to an abrupt stop, leaving passengers dangling precariously above the fairground. "Daddy, is the wheel broken?" Sophie asked, her small fingers gripping his hair a little tighter. Yates winced, both from the tug on his hair and the obvious mechanical failure unfolding before them. At 34, he recognized trouble when he saw it, and this definitely qualified. "Looks like it, pumpkin." "Good thing we didn't get on yet." The crowd around them murmured with concern as carnival workers rushed toward the malfunctioning ride. Yates, who made his modest living as a maintenance technician at an apartment complex, instinctively analyzed the situation. The main gear system appeared to have seized, leaving the wheel frozen at an awkward angle, with several carriages suspended at the most dangerous heights. One carriage in particular caught his attention about 3/4 of the way up. A woman in a blue dress was clearly in distress, gripping the safety bar with white knuckles as her carriage tilted at an unnatural angle. Even from a distance, Yates could tell the locking mechanism had partially failed. "Sir, please step back." A harried carnival employee attempted to create a perimeter around the ride. Yates set Sophie down carefully. "Hey, buddy, I work with machinery like this. I think I can help." It was a stretch apartment. HVAC systems were nothing like a Ferris wheel, but mechanical principles were universal, and someone needed to act before that carriage gave way. The worker hesitated, looking between Yates and the increasingly panicked faces of those trapped on the ride. "The fire department's been called, but they're 20 minutes out." Sophie tugged on Yates' worn jeans. "Daddy, are you going to be a hero?" He smiled down at his daughter, the one bright constant in his life since his wife had left them 3 years ago for a fresh start in California. "I'm going to try, sweetie. Can you wait right here with?" He glanced around and spotted a familiar face, Mrs. Jenkins from Sophie's school. "Mrs. Jenkins, could you watch Sophie for a few minutes?" The elderly teacher nodded. "Of course, Yates, be careful up there." With a grateful nod, Yates approached the ride operator's booth, where a frantic teenager was flipping switches uselessly. "Let me see the manual override," Yates said with more authority than he felt. His years of fixing everything from garbage disposals to boiler systems on a shoestring budget had taught him one valuable lesson: most mechanical failures had simple solutions if you understood the basic principles. The teenager gratefully stepped aside as Yates examined the control panel. Above them, the woman in the blue dress called out, her voice tight with fear. "Please, this thing is coming loose." Yates looked up, making eye contact with her. Even in distress, he was struck by her composed demeanor, frightened but not hysterical. "I'm coming up." He shouted, making a quick decision. The override wasn't working, which meant he'd need to secure her carriage manually before it detached. Grabbing a maintenance harness hanging nearby, Yates quickly strapped himself in and began climbing the internal frame of the wheel, moving with the confidence of someone who'd spent years navigating precarious spaces to fix broken pipes and wiring. "Daddy's really brave," he heard Sophie telling Mrs. Jenkins proudly, and the sound of his daughter's voice steeled his resolve. As he climbed higher, the wind picked up, making the metal structure creak ominously. When he finally reached the woman's carriage, he could see the broken latch that was barely holding the door closed. "Hi there," he said, trying to sound calmer than he felt as he secured himself to the frame. "I'm Yates. I'm going to get you out of here." The woman's dark hair whipped around her face as she looked up at him with piercing green eyes. "Morgan Winters," she replied, her voice surprisingly steady. "Please tell me you do this for a living." Yates managed a grin as he carefully examined the failing latch. "Not exactly. But I'm good with fixing things." He didn't add that his fixing things budget usually involved duct tape and second-hand parts, nothing like the precision engineering of this carnival ride, failing as it was. "That's not entirely reassuring," Morgan said, but there was a hint of a smile on her lips despite her white-knuckled grip on the safety bar. "Trust me, Yates said, pulling a multi-tool from his pocket. My daughter's watching, and I never disappoint her if I can help it. Working carefully, Yates managed to temporarily secure the latch with a piece of wire from his tool. The whole carriage connection is failing. We need to get you out of there and onto the framework where I am. Morgan glanced down at the ground, now 50 feet below them. I'm not exactly dressed for climbing, she said, gesturing to her tailored blue dress and heels. Kick off the shoes at least, Yates suggested, extending his hand toward her. And don't look down. With surprising agility, Morgan slipped off her expensive-looking heels and took his hand. Her grip was strong, her hand soft against his calloused palm. On 3, Yates instructed, positioning himself to support her weight. 1, 2, 3, Morgan moved with unexpected grace, stepping carefully over the carriage door and onto the metal framework where Yates was secured. Just as her second foot cleared the carriage, the temporary wire gave way, and the carriage door swung open completely. That was close, she breathed, now standing precariously on the narrow metal beam, her body pressed against his as he anchored them both to the frame. We're not done yet, Yates said, becoming acutely aware of her proximity. He could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive over the metallic scent of the ride. We need to climb down. Can you follow my lead? Morgan nodded, determination replacing fear in her eyes. Show me the way. Together, they began the careful descent, with Yates guiding Morgan's feet to each handhold. They were about halfway down when a loud grinding noise cut through the air, and the entire wheel shifted slightly. Hold on. Yates instinctively wrapped an arm around Morgan's waist, securing them both to the frame as the wheel settled again. Is your daughter still watching? Morgan asked, her breath warm against his neck. Yates glanced down and spotted Sophie's pink jacket. His daughter was jumping up and down, pointing at them. Oh yeah, this will be her favorite story for months. Morgan laughed, a surprisingly melodic sound given their precarious situation. Mine too, though my board of directors might not believe it. Board of directors. Yates raised an eyebrow as they resumed their careful descent. I'm the CEO of Winter's Innovation. We make the Winter Smart Home Systems, Yates finished, recognition dawning. We installed one in the luxury building I maintain last month, way too complicated for most of the tenants. Morgan's eyes lit up with interest. Really? I'd love to hear about that. User feedback is valuable. They were nearly to the ground when the final lug on the carriage they'd evacuated gave way. The metal compartment crashed through lower sections of the wheel before smashing into the platform below, sending splinters of wood and metal flying. That could have been me, Morgan whispered, her professional composure finally cracking as Yates helped her onto solid ground. Daddy. Sophie broke free from Mrs. Jenkins and raced toward them, crashing into Yates' legs with the full force of her 7-year-old excitement. You saved the pretty lady. Yates lifted Sophie into his arms, suddenly aware of how unprofessional he must look. Faded jeans with a tear in one knee, a worn Henley shirt, and 3 days' worth of stubble because razors weren't in the budget this month. Morgan smoothed down her rumpled blue dress and smiled at Sophie. He certainly did. Your daddy is very brave, Sophie beamed with pride. He fixes everything. Even when the sink exploded and water went everywhere and we had to use all our towels, Yates felt heat rise to his face. Thanks for that detailed family history, Pumpkin. Morgan laughed, the sound drawing his eyes back to her face. Now that they were safely on the ground, he could appreciate how striking she was, not just beautiful, but with an intelligence that radiated from her expression. Mr. Vaughn, the carnival manager, rushed toward them, his face pale. You saved our customer. How can we thank you? Before Yates could respond, Morgan stepped forward. For starters, you can refund everyone's tickets and shut down this death trap until it's properly inspected. Her voice had shifted, taking on an authoritative tone that made the manager shrink back slightly. Yes, madam, of course. Sirens wailed in the distance as the fire trucks finally approached. In the commotion that followed, with statements to be given and paperwork to be filled out, Yates was surprised when Morgan remained at his side. I never properly thanked you, she said quietly as paramedics checked her for injuries she insisted she didn't have. No need, Yates replied, helping Sophie put her jacket back on as the evening air cooled. Anyone would have done the same. Morgan tilted her head, studying him. No, they wouldn't have. Most people would have waited for the professionals. She reached into her purse and extracted a business card. I'd like to thank you properly. Perhaps dinner? Yates stared at the embossed card, emblazoned with the Winters Innovation logo. I don't think the kind of places you're used to would appreciate my wardrobe, he said with a self-deprecating smile, acutely aware of the difference in their circumstances. Morgan's expression softened. Then you pick the place. Somewhere Sophie would enjoy too. She glanced at his daughter, who was watching their interaction with undisguised interest. What do you think, Sophie? Would you like to have dinner with me sometime? Sophie nodded enthusiastically. Can we go to Polly's? They have the best spaghetti, and Daddy lets me have a root beer float if I eat all my vegetables, Morgan smiled. Polly's sounds perfect. After exchanging phone numbers and confirming plans for the following weekend, Yates watched as Morgan was whisked away in a sleek company car that had arrived for her. Sophie waved enthusiastically as the black vehicle pulled away. She's like a princess, Daddy, Sophie declared on their walk to the bus stop. Yates chuckled. More like a queen pumpkin. CEOs don't take orders, they give them. Is she going to be your girlfriend? Sophie asked with the blunt curiosity only children can muster. No, honey. She's just being nice because I helped her. But even as he said it, Yates couldn't ignore the flutter of something long dormant awakening in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced since, before his ex-wife had decided that life with a struggling maintenance man wasn't what she'd signed up for. The week passed in a blur of leaking faucets, malfunctioning heating units, and Sophie's second-grade homework. Yates almost convinced himself that Morgan Winters, CEO, would cancel their dinner plans. Surely she had more important matters to attend to than thanking the maintenance man who'd helped her off a broken carnival ride. But Friday evening, his phone buzzed with a text confirming their plans for Saturday, and Yates found himself standing in front of his closet, realizing he owned exactly one button-down shirt without a stain or tear. Wear the blue one, Sophie advised from his bedroom doorway. It matches your eyes, that's what Grandma always says. Yates smiled at his daughter's earnestness. Blue it is then. Saturday arrived with unexpected nervousness. Yates found himself checking his watch repeatedly as he and Sophie waited at Polly's, a family-owned Italian restaurant that represented the height of fine dining in their modest budget. She's late, Sophie observed, sipping her water and swinging her legs beneath the table. Maybe she got stuck on another Ferris wheel. Yates laughed despite his anxiety. I think one malfunctioning carnival ride per lifetime is enough for anyone. Just then, the bell above the restaurant door jingled and Morgan walked in. Yates had expected her to look out of place in the casual establishment, but she dressed down in jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. The only hint of her executive status was the quality of her clothing even in casual wear. Everything about her screamed expensive craftsmanship. Sorry I'm late, she said, sliding into the booth beside Sophie. Traffic was terrible coming from downtown. We ordered garlic bread already, Sophie informed her, "'cause I get really hungry after ballet class." Smart thinking, Morgan replied seriously. Garlic bread is essential post-ballet nutrition. Yates felt something loosen in his chest as he watched Morgan engage with Sophie, asking about her dance class and school with genuine interest. There was none of the condescension he'd half expected from someone of her status. As they enjoyed their meal, spaghetti and meatballs for Sophie, lasagna for Yates, and eggplant parmesan for Morgan, the conversation flowed surprisingly easily. Morgan spoke about building her company from the ground up after developing the Winter Smart system in her garage 10 years ago. Wait, Yates interrupted. You're the actual inventor. I thought you were just, The corporate face, Morgan supplied with a knowing smile. No, I have a degree in electrical engineering. The first prototype nearly burned down my apartment. Daddy says that's how you know you're on the right track, Sophie piped up, marinara sauce decorating her chin. When something almost catches fire but doesn't actually burn, Morgan laughed, handing Sophie a napkin. Your dad sounds very wise. Yates felt a flush of pleasure at her words. It had been a long time since anyone had seen value in his practical knowledge. As Sophie focused on consuming her root beer float, earned by finishing all her broccoli, Morgan leaned closer to Yates. I've been thinking about what you said about our system being too complicated. I shouldn't have said that, Yates backtracked. It's a great system. No, you were right, Morgan insisted. Our engineers are brilliant, but they sometimes forget that not everyone has a technical background. I'd love to get your perspective on how we could make things more user-friendly. Yates blinked in surprise. You're asking my opinion on your multi-million-dollar system, Morgan nodded. Who better than someone who deals with confused users every day? Actually, she hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. I was wondering if you might consider coming to our office sometime. As a consultant, paid of course. The offer caught Yates off guard. I don't have any formal qualifications for something like that. You have exactly the qualifications I need: practical experience and common sense. She glanced at Sophie, who was drawing patterns in her ice cream with her spoon, and clearly excellent problem-solving skills under pressure. The evening ended with promises to continue their conversation, and as Yates tucked Sophie into bed that night, his daughter fixed him with a serious look. I like Morgan, Daddy. She listens like she really wants to hear what I'm saying. Yates smoothed her hair back from her forehead. That's because she does, Pumpkin. Are you going to see her again? Sophie asked through a yawn. I think I might, Yates admitted, surprised by how much he hoped it was true. The consultation opportunity at Winter's Innovation turned into a regular gig, with Yates spending one evening a week in their sleek downtown offices, reviewing user interfaces and installation procedures. He still maintained his day job at the apartment complex, but the extra income from Morgan's company allowed him to start a small savings account for Sophie's future and replace their aging refrigerator. Morgan often joined them for these sessions, her sharp mind quickly grasping the practical implications of Yates' suggestions. Sometimes their meetings would extend into dinner, with Morgan asking about Sophie's latest adventures or Yates' most challenging repair of the week. 2 months after the Ferris wheel incident, Yates was helping Morgan test a new installation sequence in the company's workshop when she suddenly set down her tablet and fixed him with an intent gaze. Yates, what are we doing? The question caught him off guard. Troubleshooting the bathroom sensor installation, she shook her head, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. No, I mean, this, she gestured between them. These dinners, these late evenings, I find myself looking forward to your visits all week, and I need to know if I'm alone in that. Yates set down the screwdriver he'd been holding, his heart pounding. You're not alone, he admitted quietly. But Morgan, our worlds are completely different. You run a tech empire, I fix toilets for a living. And yet you're the one who consistently finds solutions my highly paid engineering team misses, she countered. Don't diminish what you bring to the table, Yates. I've dated enough executives and tech bros to last a lifetime. They all want something from me: connections, funding, status. You're the first man in years who sees me, not my company. Yates swallowed hard. What about Sophie? My life revolves around her. Morgan's expression softened. Sophie is wonderful. That's not an obstacle for me. It's one of the things I admire most about you, how devoted you are to her. Before Yates could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Jenkins, who was watching Sophie. The message was simple but urgent. Sophie fell at the playground, at Memorial Hospital, not serious but asking for you. I have to go, Yates said, already gathering his things. Sophie's hurt. Without hesitation, Morgan grabbed her keys. My car's faster than waiting for a bus. I'm driving you. The trip to the hospital was a blur of anxiety for Yates, with Morgan navigating traffic with focused determination. When they arrived, she stayed at his side as they rushed to the pediatric emergency room, where they found Sophie sitting on an exam table with a splint on her wrist and tears drying on her cheeks. Daddy, she cried when she saw him, reaching out her good arm. Yates embraced her carefully. Hey, Pumpkin, what happened? I fell off the monkey bars, Sophie explained, her voice wobbling. The doctor says my wrist is broke, but they're going to put a cool cast on it and everyone can sign it. Relief flooded through Yates as he realized the injury wasn't severe. He turned to thank Morgan for the ride, only to find her already engaged in conversation with the attending physician, asking detailed questions about Sophie's care. Later, as they waited for the orthoptist to apply Sophie's cast, Morgan sat beside them, entertaining Sophie with stories of her own childhood injuries. "I broke both arms at the same time when I was 9, she told Sophie, who listened with wide-eyed fascination. "I was trying to build a zip line between 2 trees in our backyard. How did you eat?" Sophie asked with the practical concern of a 7-year-old. "My dad fed me," Morgan said, a fond smile crossing her face. "He cut up all my food into bite-sized pieces and never once complained when I got more on his shirt than in my mouth." Yates watched their interaction with a growing warmth in his chest. When the orthoptist asked if Mom wanted to help pick out the cast color, neither he nor Sophie corrected the assumption, as Morgan gravely discussed the merits of purple versus green with Sophie. It was nearly midnight when they finally arrived back at Yates' modest 2-bedroom apartment, Sophie drowsy from pain medication in her new purple cast. Morgan helped carry their things inside, and then stood awkwardly in the small living room as Yates tucked Sophie into bed. "Thank you," he said when he returned, meaning it more deeply than he could express. "For everything today." Morgan stepped closer to him, her eyes reflecting the dim light from the kitchen. "That's what you do when you care about someone, Yates. You show up." The kiss that followed was gentle, a question more than a declaration. Yates responded with all the feelings he'd been carefully containing over the past weeks, pulling her closer as the kiss deepened. When they finally separated, Morgan rested her forehead against his. "I should go." "You should," Yates agreed reluctantly. "Sophie's pain meds will wear off around 4 a.m., Morgan smiled, her hands still resting lightly on his chest. "Rain check, definitely." In the weeks that followed, their relationship blossomed despite the obvious differences in their circumstances. Morgan joined them for movie nights in Yates' small apartment, brought Sophie engineering kits that sparked her interest in building things, and never once made Yates feel inadequate for his modest income or practical career. For his part, Yates introduced Morgan to the simple pleasures she'd missed while building her Empire neighborhood block parties, discount matinee movies with too much popcorn, and the satisfaction of fixing something with your own hands. 4 months into their relationship, Morgan invited Yates and Sophie to her home for the first time, a sleek penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Sophie explored the space with delighted curiosity, while Yates tried not to feel overwhelmed by the obvious wealth it represented. "You're uncomfortable," Morgan observed as they stood in her kitchen, watching Sophie examine the high-tech entertainment system. "It's just a lot," Yates admitted. "Your coffee maker probably costs more than my monthly rent." Morgan stepped closer, taking his hand. "I built all of this from nothing, Yates. 10 years ago, I was living in a studio apartment eating ramen noodles every night while I developed my first prototype. This is the result of a lot of hard work and some lucky breaks." She squeezed his hand. "But none of it matters if I don't have people in my life who value me for who I am, not what I've built." That night, after Sophie had fallen asleep in the guest room, Yates and Morgan shared their first night together, discovering each other with tender exploration and passionate connection that left them both breathless. "Stay," Morgan whispered as dawn began to break over the city skyline. "Both of you, not just tonight." Yates propped himself up on one elbow, studying her face in the soft morning light. "Are you asking us to move in with you?" After 4 months, Morgan traced the line of his jaw with her fingertip. "I'm asking you to consider it." "I know it seems fast, but I've never been more certain of anything." She hesitated. "I love you, Yates, and I love Sophie. When I imagine my future now, both of you are in it." The words hung between them, momentous and real. Yates thought about the difference between their lives, her executive meetings and innovative designs, his leaking pipes and budget repairs. Yet somehow, together, they'd found a balance that worked, each appreciating what the other brought to the relationship. "I love you too," he said finally, the words coming easily despite the magnitude of the admission. But this is a conversation we need to have with Sophie. Her happiness comes first. Morgan's smile was radiant. Always. That's one of the reasons I fell in love with you in the first place. The conversation with Sophie happened over pancakes, with Morgan nervously explaining the idea and Yates watching his daughter's reaction carefully. So we would live here, with all the cool gadgets, Sophie clarified, maple syrup dripping from her fork. That's right, Morgan confirmed. But only if you want to. This is a big decision. Sophie considered this with the serious deliberation only children can give to life-altering questions. Would I still go to the same school, because I'm going to be the frog in the class play next month? Yates exchanged an amused glance with Morgan. Yes, Pumpkin, you'd still be in the same school, we'd make sure of that. And Daddy would still fix things when they break, because you said he's the best at fixing stuff. Morgan reached for Yates' hand across the table. Absolutely. Your dad is irreplaceable, Sophie nodded, apparently satisfied. Then I think it would be okay, as long as we can bring Mr. Snuggles. She paused, looking between the adults with unexpected perception. Are you guys going to get married? Brianna's mom and stepdad got married, and she got to be a flower girl. The question caught them both by surprise. Yates found himself looking at Morgan, curious about her reaction. To his astonishment, she didn't seem flustered or caught off guard. Not right away, Morgan answered honestly. But someday, if your dad would want that, I think I would like it very much. 6 months later, Yates stood in the entryway of what was now their shared home, watching as Morgan helped Sophie with her science project, a working model of a Ferris wheel that actually rotated safely, a source of great amusement between them. His life had transformed in ways he never could have imagined that fateful day at the carnival. He still worked at the apartment complex, finding satisfaction in his practical skills, but he'd also accepted a part-time position at Winter's Innovation, heading up a new division focused on user experience and practical applications. Morgan glanced up, catching him watching them. Her smile still had the power to quicken his heart, even after nearly a year together. The fairgrounds called, Yates said, holding up his phone. They're reopening next month with all new safety certifications. They want to offer us lifetime passes as a thank you for not suing them last year. Morgan laughed. How generous, though I think one near-death experience on a Ferris wheel is enough for me. I want to go, Sophie exclaimed, but only if Daddy checks all the rides first. Deal, Morgan agreed, rising to greet Yates with a kiss. Your dad is the best safety inspector I know. Later that night, with Sophie asleep and the city lights twinkling beyond their windows, Yates held Morgan close on the balcony, reflecting on how a mechanical failure had led to the most fortunate turn in his life. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if that Ferris wheel hadn't broken down? He asked, his chin resting on top of her head. Morgan turned in his arms, her expression thoughtful. I was miserable that day, you know. Trapped in meetings, dealing with investors who saw me as nothing but profit margins. I went to that carnival alone because I needed to remember what it felt like to just enjoy something simple. She traced the line of his collarbone through his shirt. So maybe it wasn't the wheel breaking that was important. Maybe I was already looking for something real, and you were exactly who I needed to find. Yates kissed her then, beneath the stars that had witnessed their unlikely beginning. Sometimes life's machinery broke down in exactly the right way, creating opportunities for repair that went far beyond metal and gears, reaching instead into the very heart of what made life worth living. I'm glad I looked up, he whispered against her lips. And I'm glad you climbed up, she responded, her arms tightening around him. Best mechanical failure of my life. They stood together, the CEO and the maintenance man, their differences forgotten in the shared certainty that they had found in each other exactly what they needed, not just someone to rescue or be rescued, but a partner for the journey ahead, no matter what unexpected breakdowns might come their way.